Boy, we have a lot of ground to cover today. So, after Joshua dies, the tribe of Judah takes Jerusalem from the Canaanites, and they do not completely wipe them out, so that might come back to bite them in the butt later. Immediately after this, the generation after Joshua's are complete heathens. Israel is worshipping false gods. This enrages God, who allows their enemies like the Canaanites to conquer them. They plead with God to save them from their enemies, and God frees them by raising up judges who are chosen individuals by God to lead all of Israel. The first judge is named Othniel, and he freed Israel from their enemies of that time. The importance of judges were simple. Since Israel had no king like all the other nations around them, God was acknowledged as their king, and he would use his chosen judges to serve as his representative to his people. But back to topic. Once Othniel saves them from their enemies, he lives the rest of his life guiding Israel to seek God and live righteously. But he dies eventually. Then the people immediately go back to worshipping false gods after the death of Othniel. God then allows them to be conquered again by King Eglon, one of their enemies. They plead with God to save them again, and God raises up the second judge, named Ehud, who goes and plunges a sword into the stomach of Eglon. After Ehud dies, then comes the third judge, named Shamgar, and during his time, the Philistines, another enemy of the Israelites, start opposing them. So Shamgar goes and proceeds to kill 600 of them and drive them away from Israel. And so he lives out the remainder of his life guiding the Israelites, but after he dies, Israel falls back into worshipping false gods. Then God allows their enemies to oppress them once again. King Jabin, another enemy of the Israelites, conquers them. The people go and seek help from our fourth and only female judge, named Deborah. She then sends out a man named Barak, who rides off and slays and defeats King Jabin's forces, freeing Israel once again. But sadly, after the time of Deborah, Israel falls into worshipping false idols yet again, and God allows their enemies from Midian to conquer them. They plead for salvation, and God then calls on a man named Gideon. After some convincing, Gideon takes up the offer and becomes the fifth judge. He then assembles an army and marches to defeat their enemy. But God tells him to send the majority of his army away, only leaving 300 men in total. But still, these 300 men manage to sneak into the Midianite camp and slaughter them, thus freeing Israel yet again. The people, the Israelites, ask him to rule over them as their king, but Gideon refuses this offer and says that God should rule over them, not him. He then leaves and lives out the remainder of his life and, well, dies. As soon as Gideon dies, guess what happens? Israel goes back to worshipping false gods. Then we are introduced to our sixth judge, named Abimelech. So he's also the son of Gideon. And basically, he's kind of like a bastard. He was born from the union of Gideon and one of his concubines. And so Abimelech decides that he wants to be king, and so he murders all 70 of his brethren to do so. He then regularly goes to war with even his own subject, and all around he does a really bad job of being king. And during one of his sieges, a woman drops a stone onto his head, which proves to be fatal. He then orders one of his men to kill him, so no one knows a woman did it. So after that mess, a man named Tola rises up and becomes the seventh judge of Israel. He rules for about 23 years and then dies. After Tola comes our eighth judge, named Jair, who ruled for 22 years and had 30 sons, and then he dies as well. Israel goes back to worshipping false gods as usual. God gets upset and then allows them to be conquered by the Philistines and Amorites. They plead with God for deliverance, and then he raises up our ninth judge, named Jephthah, Okay, forgive me, guys. I'm really bad at these names. But point is, Jephthah, he goes off and he butchers a lot of Amorites. And during his war, he makes a vow to God that if he survives this war, he will sacrifice whatever first comes to his house. He succeeds in his war and returns home. But the thing is that the first being to appear onto his house is his daughter. And he remembers his promise about sacrificing whatever first came to his house. So he's distressed and obviously very resentful of the vow he made, but he follows up on it anyways and sacrifices his daughter. So after the time of Jephthah rises the 10th judge named Ibzan. And so all we know about him is that he had 30 sons, 30 daughters, multiple wives, and he ruled for 7 years, and he died. After him comes the 11th judge, named Elon, not Musk, and then he ruled for about 10 years, and died. And then after Elon comes the 12th judge, named Abdon, who had 40 sons, 30 grandchildren, and he rules for about 8 years, and he dies. So after this, the Israelites started worshipping false gods again, and the Philistines conquered them. God then sends an angel to a couple, telling them that their son will be the 13th judge and save Israel from their enemies. He was named Samson, and he took a Nazirite vow, which is to never drink alcohol that comes from grapes, to never cut his hair, and to never touch the corpses of anything that is dead. With this said, we have a time jump to a grown-up Samson. And basically, his introduction is that he goes up to his family and says that he wants to marry a Philistine woman, which is against the commandments of God and the laws of the Israelites. His parents try to talk him out of marrying a member of their sworn enemy that he's supposed to destroy, but Samson doesn't listen to them and goes on with it anyways. On his way to go, he sees a lion attack him. And because of his Nazirite vow, God gave him a unique ability, basically enhance great physical strength. He uses this to rip the lion in half. He then later notices that bees have made honey in its carcass. He then takes some of the honey, eating it. And this is a symbolic act because he touches the corpse, which is against his Nazirite vow, showing that he does not care about his vow or God's command. So after this, he goes to his wedding, and during his wedding, he makes a riddle based off of his experience killing the lion. And the first person who gets it will have 30 new garments to wear. The guest can't solve it, obviously, because it's a trick riddle. Only Samson knows the answer to it. So they threaten his wife secretly to get the answer. They do, and, Samson figures out that since he's the only one who knew this riddle, it was nearly impossible to solve, so he knows his wife spilled the beans. He then goes and murders a bunch of Philistine men and takes their garments to the cheaters of his wedding. He then storms off because he's so angry at his wife for giving away the riddle secret that he just basically leaves her and goes off. Later, he realizes that he may have over-exaggerated a bit, and then he returns to her home, but her parents inform him that they thought he would never come back, so they married her off to someone else. They try pawning off their younger daughter, but Samson's not having any of it, and then he vows to destroy the Philistines. He burns their corpses by tying a bunch of torches to the tails of foxes he captures. He then sends them loose on the fields, burning them. The Philistines find out Samson did this, and because of they found out he did this because his wife was taken away from him, so they burn her and her family alive because they indirectly blamed them for Samson's anger. Samson gets even more angry at this, and then he kills a lot of them and then retreats into Israel for protection. The Philistines come marching against him, and they demand the Israelites to hand over Samson. They then convince Samson to turn himself in, and so he does, and they tie his hands and send him to the Philistine army. While there, he uses his strength to break free from his bonds. He then takes a jawbone from a donkey and proceeds to kill 1,000 Philistine warriors by himself. He then relaxes and does his job as a judge finally, and rules Israel for about 20 years, but eventually he falls in love with another Philistine woman named Delilah. She was bribed to find out the secret of his power, and so she got with him. She then learns that it is his long hair that gives him his great physical strength, because it represents his Nazirite vow to God. While he sleeps, she cuts his hair, and the Philistine warriors capture him, and since he no longer has this great strength, they easily subdue him and gouge out his eyes, and then make him a slave. One day, they have a celebration and bring out Samson to mock him, but he prays for vengeance for himself. God then gives him his power back, and he pushes 2 pillars of the temple down, killing himself and thousands of Philistine people. After this, some time passes, and the 14th judge is a man named Eli, who is also the great priest of Israel. He rules for about 40 years, and is pretty good at what he does, except being a good father, because his 2 sons are described as evil men. One day a woman comes into the temple praying for a baby because she is barren. She vows that if she has a son, she will devote him to God. She then has a baby named Samuel, who will go on to be the 15th and final judge of Israel. When he is a child, she brings him back to the temple to be raised by Eli. During this, Samuel receives messages from God and finds out that his calling is to become a prophet. And God tells Samuel, since Eli's family is corrupt, it will be punished. Samuel tells Eli this, and Eli accepts God's judgment. Later, during a battle with the Philistines, Eli's 2 sons decide to take the Ark of the Covenant with them into the battle to boost morale. But this is actually a big no-no because it's supposed to stay with the priest. They do this, however, ignoring that, and basically once they go in, they basically still get butchered, and they die, the both of them. And also the Ark gets taken away from Israel, and the Philistines now hold it. Eli is so shocked by this news, he falls backwards while on his chair and dies, breaking his neck. He lived for about 98 years. Samuel takes up the role as the 15th and final judge of Israel. He serves as a judge, a prophet, and a military commander for his people, and lives out his life doing his duty to God and the people. And so he lives happily ever after, or does he? Dun, dun, dun.